It's Christmas! To Rob, screw you from Santa. What? Oh no. Why would Santa do this to me? Merry Christmas and welcome to Rob's Retro Reviews. Today we're getting into the festive spirit by taking a look at not only one of the worst PS1 games ever made, but a game that's considered to be one of the worst video games ever, Bubsy 3D. So, is it as bad as people make out it is, or is it just an overblown meme? Let's pop it in and take a look. For those that don't know about Bubsy, he's a platforming mascot who made his debut on the Sega Genesis, or Sega Mega Drive for us Europeans, and the SNES, with his first game, Bubsy in Claws Encounters of the Third Kind. This game was a 2D platformer which was heavily inspired by Sonic the Hedgehog. He later starred in Bubsy 2, again released on the Genesis and SNES, and the lesser-known third game in the series, Bubsy in Fractured Fairy Tales, which was exclusive to the Atari Jaguar. After 3 2D platforming games, we found ourselves in the year 1996. 3D gaming had yet to become the norm, but this would be the year of the 3D revolution, with games such as Crash Bandicoot, Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, and of course, Super Mario 64 all making their debuts. Lesser known platforming heroes had to make the jump to 3D to remain relevant, and because of this, Bubsy 3D was released in late 1996 to compete with all these other titles. The thing to bear in mind here is that before 1996, there wasn't really such a thing as a 3D platformer. And while Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario 64 showed the world what the genre was capable of, there was bound to be some game developers who didn't cope with 3D design as well as Naughty Dog or Nintendo did. Just look at Sonic 3D Blast for an example of that. So really, no matter how bad Bubsy 3D is, at least we can say that it took a risk with becoming 3D, and regardless of whether it was successful or failed, that's something to respect. Now, despite me harbouring a little bit of respect for the developers themselves, I have absolutely no respect for the game, and that's because it's a failure in almost every single way. Let's start with the opening cutscene. It actually doesn't look too bad, and it sets up the story fairly well. Basically, an alien race called the Woolies are trying to steal all the yarn balls from Earth and keep getting stopped by a bobcat called Bubsy. In retaliation, the Woolies abducted Bubsy and brought him back to the Woolly homeworld as a prisoner. However, the rocket carrying Bubsy crash-landed and enabled Bubsy to escape and run amok. Bubsy then travels around collecting rocket parts in order to build a spaceship to escape and return back to Earth. The cutscene actually doesn't look too bad, and it's an interesting idea showing the Woolies side of the story as they hold a town meeting and panic about the escaped bobcat. Where it falls apart though is when Bubsy himself interrupts the town meeting and has terrible 2D facial animation, which conflicts with the 3D animation seen in the rest of the cutscene. Another thing that doesn't help is the fact that Bubsy's character is so goddamn annoying, and instantly he throws in a one-liner which falls completely flat and does nothing but make us hate him.
I should have taken that left turn at Uranus! Was it something I said? What could possibly go wrong?
With the story pretty much out of the way, we can get on with the game itself. But believe me, we're gonna need to prepare for what's ahead of us. So here we go, the first level of Bubsy 3D. Let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. This game's visuals and graphics are some of the worst, if not the worst, on the PS1. Everything is textureless and just looks like an alpha test of a game rather than being the fully completed version. The mountains, or what I assume are mountains at least, almost look like wireframes, and they're just random flat shapes placed next to each other. There's no artistry here, no attempt to make the environments look like real things, and the game doesn't get any better in this regard as it progresses. Every level almost looks identical to each other, and when the design of the levels becomes more open, it can cause you to get lost in a maze of solid colours because there's no landmarks at all. No attempt was even put into making the platforms have any kind of context within the game's world. They're literally just solid floating platforms. The draw distance is pathetic too. You're always seemingly surrounded by this thick fog, and it just serves to make the game look even worse than it already does. Even the things you interact with, like checkpoints and switches, look incredibly basic and rudimentary, and the whole thing just looks like a child created it. Bubsy's modelling game looks okay from behind, but then when you crouch, it's like his model is just squashed. What's even going on here? It looks like he's getting crushed by an invisible vice or something. You know we're in for a bad time when the first impression a game makes is this bad, and we've not even started talking about the controls. The way Bubsy moves introduces a whole new set of problems. Basic movement is done with tank controls, so pressing up will make Bubsy move forward, while pressing left or right will make him turn on the spot. While I argue that this control scheme can work with certain games, it just feels terrible here. The issue is that when you try and move forward and turn, Bubsy's turning circle is way too big, and you just constantly overshoot corners because of how slowly he responds. This also results in running straight into enemies even though you're pressing the right buttons to swerve past them. Bubsy also accelerates way too quickly, and the levels aren't designed to be done fast, so I have no idea why they chose to make him so speedy. Because of the awkward turning and the fact he picks up speed so quick, the only way of making it through the game without constantly crashing into walls or enemies is to run forward, then stop, then turn on the spot, then move forward a bit more, but stop before Bubsy accelerates and runs into something, and then turn on the spot again when you come to a corner. It's ridiculous. I know this game was an early 3D platformer, and I'm reviewing this game after having played a ton of newer games that have mastered 3D movement, but come on, surely they could see that something was wrong here. That's not the end of our control problems though. On top of this, we also have a standard jump and a glide move. Why the hell a bobcat is able to glide through the air like this, I have no idea. I can honestly say I've never seen a cat do this in real life, but whatever. The issue with these jumps is that the camera violently tilts upwards whenever you jump, which is obviously supposed to give you a look at the floor so you can see where you're about to land. But the camera moves too quickly, and it's also way too extreme with how far it goes into the air. It stops you being able to see any projectiles in front of you, and in some cases it stops you from being able to see where a platform you jump into is positioned, so you just have to do a leap of faith. Bubsy's main form of attack is to simply jump on his enemies, and this is really annoying because I found myself quite clearly landing on them, but instead of killing them, I took a hit. It's like the enemy hitboxes needed to be slightly bigger or something, but only in terms of hitting them, not them hitting you. Bubsy can also use atoms, which are scattered all around the levels, as makeshift projectiles, which is actually an interesting idea that could have been expanded into a mechanic which separated Bubsy from other games at the time. But instead, it's just kind of pointless. It's way easier and quicker to just jump on enemies, and there's no enemies in the game that need to be eliminated in a specific way, so it's pretty useless using atoms. In fact, you can't even aim atoms vertically, and most enemies will be above or below you, so it's not possible to hit most enemies you come across like this regardless. Also, why in God's name do the atoms fly back and hit you if you shoot them too far into the distance? It's like a literal slap in the face. You would think I would be nearing the end of the list of problems that I encountered in the first level, but no, we're just getting started. The next pretty big problem is the really irritating sound design. The music in this level actually isn't too bad. It's upbeat and bouncy and gives the level a degree of character, which is desperately needed considering the poor job the graphics are doing in that regard. But all of the background sounds are just so annoying. The obvious example of this is Bubsy's voice acting. It's just so obnoxious and it's trying way too hard to be funny. It's also trying to be self-aware, which I'm not a fan of in this instance because it doesn't really make any sense in the context of the game. Here are just a few examples of his lousy and irritating voice.
Now, what would a platform game be without platforms? I wonder if there's any extra lives up there. Woohoo! Now, if you lose a Bubsy, you'll start over here instead of at the beginning of the level. Ain't life grand? Come on, come on! Don't be shy. Step right up and win valuable prizes. Shoot the Woolly with the atom. Hey, once I grab this power-up...
Bubsy smash puny Woolies.
You can actually turn Bubsy's voice off in the options menu, and this leads me to believe that the developers knew that Bubsy's voice was annoying, but just thought of it as being a character trait. But it's a very unappealing character trait, and it should have been scrapped. Having complained about Bubsy's voice quite a lot, one thing I will say is that he actually doesn't talk as much as people make out he does. In the first few levels he will say quite a lot, but then later in the game I hardly even noticed it anymore. Maybe I just adjusted to it over time, but I think he does shut up more the further you get into the game. That's not the only poor sound design though. One thing I noticed is that certain sounds don't properly exist as 360-degree entities. There's probably a much better way of explaining that, but what I mean is that if you're looking at something and it's on camera, it'll be making a noise, but then when you look away, the noise will just completely cut out. Like it doesn't exist unless you can actually see it. Here's an example. The enemies also sing along to the background music and it becomes so annoying after a while, and it genuinely started to annoy me by the end of the game. It's such an annoying sound effect and such a repetitive tune they make. It sticks in your head but you hate it. It's like the curse of playing Bubsy that lingers with you long after you've finished it. Okay, this video has been going on for long enough now and I'm still on the first level, so let's actually progress and move on in the game, shall we? The objective in each level is to simply make it to the exit and then move on to the next level and repeat. There are optional collectibles to be found in the form of rockets, which can be found in hidden areas within the levels. There's 2 in each level, and to get the true ending you'll need all of them. I actually went into this game with the plan of getting 100%, which I've never done before, but I gave up on the second level because of how irritating it is to find these things. They can be hidden behind seemingly random walls which you have to shoot with an atom to make disappear, and this just came across to me as a lazy way of hiding the collectibles. I wasn't going to be searching each level for God knows how long, only to find that I missed something behind a hidden wall I walked past a million times. It's just not worth it. The atoms also act as the collectible in this game that's the equivalent of coins in Super Mario. If you get 100 you'll get an extra life, 150 will grant you entry to a bonus level, and getting 200 will score you another life. Speaking of the bonus levels, let's take a look at one now. Huh. Well, let's take a closer look at the second level then. There's not a lot to say here that hasn't already been said. This level is a lot more open than the last one, and this open design becomes more prevalent as the game progresses. To be honest, I don't like how this game is so open because of how bland and uninteresting the levels are. It doesn't make me want to explore, I just want to be able to take a path to the exit and get this done with. I know I've already spoken about this, but let's just take a step back a minute and appreciate just how bad the graphics are in this game. What are we even looking at? It's just a mess of conflicting solid colours and fog. I've reviewed some bad looking games in my time, but this is by far the worst. One thing I actually quite like about this game is that each level has its own title card and ending cutscene, which is basically just a skit involving Bubsy and the Woolies. The issue is that these things have nothing to do with the levels themselves. It's like they told the designers of the title cards what the levels were going to be themed like, but then just scrapped the level theming altogether but kept the title cards. Moving on to the third level, the main thing that sticks out to me here is that the music is the same as the last 2 levels, but seems to be building up to something and getting more insane as it goes on. Have a listen. What's with that? Is it symbolic of our descent into madness? We'll probably never know. A really big issue with this game is its lack of any variety of level gimmicks. Each level feels identical to the last, especially at the start of the game, and many of the gimmicks introduced later are absolute rubbish and seem to exist simply to test your patience. But we'll get to those later. God, this game is rubbish. I've played it quite a lot as a kid, and I've completed it twice as an adult, but geez, you really do forget how bad it is after a while of not playing it. You would think it would just be one of those things where it's overblown because of the amount of people talking about it on the internet, but no. It's as bad as it's made out to be. You know you've designed a game poorly when you need to use literal arrows to point you in the right direction. This is seriously bad and one of the worst things you could do as a game designer. You can use figurative arrows in a game, like by lighting a certain area differently so it stands out and your attention is directed there, but a literal floating red arrow staring you in the face, it's utter crap. Speaking of level design, I honestly feel like this was an afterthought in the creation of Bubsy 3D, because the levels don't feel like actual cohesive levels. They feel randomly generated almost, and there's little to no structure to them. You could literally just run straight to the exit and completely bypass the entire level in some instances. It's a mess of random floating platforms above randomly placed chasms and enemies, and the game lacks any flow whatsoever. We're in for a treat in the next level, because it's the first boss. Let's see how this plays out. Well, this stage actually gave me no trouble at all, simply because I've played the start of this game a lot and I know how this boss works. However, that doesn't excuse how nonsensical it is. What you need to do is let the boss shoot the floor, and then glide above the sparks that remain where the hit landed, which propels you into the air and enables you to jump onto him. The thing is, there's nothing that indicates you can glide on these sparks to give you extra height, so I imagine loads of people would give up here because of the game not giving them information they require. It's also a terrible idea for a boss because of the camera movement I mentioned earlier. When you glide, the camera will tilt upwards and face the floor, so when you fly up, you can't see where the boss is positioned because he's too far away from you. It's a mess, but at least it's easy if you know what you're doing. And to be honest, at least it's a bit of a break from the standard levels too. The next level is our first underwater level, and as to be expected, it's terrible. It controls a bit better than the standard levels just because you can turn tighter, but the thing that absolutely kills any enjoyment you could get from this is that the enemies lock onto you and dash at you with no way of avoiding them. You can't even attack in these levels without shooting atoms, but because of the vertical movement added into the level because of being underwater, you can never hit anything because you still can't aim up or down. These levels just consisted of me desperately seeking the exit and staying as far away from the enemies as possible. And even then I got smacked by every enemy under the sun. Again though, credit where it's due, at least they tried to inject some variety into the game with underwater and boss levels on top of the standard levels. It's just a shame that every single playstyle is utter rubbish. I'm not going to go through every level in the game because it would just be a massive waste of everyone's time, so instead, let's go through bulks of them. Besides, every level at this point in the game is pretty much the same anyway. The next levels are set in a factory, I guess? There's actually a bit of texture in the environment in the way that specific tiles look metallic, but most of it is still a solid colour. So I guess it's good they put a bit more effort in with these levels, but at this point it really doesn't matter. The game suddenly gets a lot harder in these levels because the amount of enemies gets much greater, and these stupid soap bar shooting enemies pissed me off to no end. I just kept getting shot in the face constantly because of how rapidly they shoot. Bubsy can't move quickly enough to dodge things like this, and it just became absolute insanity. What's even more annoying is how you can get shot straight off of platforms and have to repeat entire platforming sections over and over and over again because of these goddamn punky green-faced idiots. After a few levels which all feel identical to the last ones, we finally find ourselves at another boss. This one is some sort of woolly mammoth. Get it? Woolly mammoth? Because the enemies in this game are called woolies? No? Okay. This boss is just as bad as the last one, if not even worse. The issue is that it's just not obvious what's going on and if you're doing the right thing when you attack. I think the way to beat this boss is to have him run at you, then he'll trip over, then you jump on him which causes some woolies watching the fight to throw a banana skin at you. Then if you get the mammoth to run into the banana, he'll slip and run into the side of the stage. Repeat this and get him to hit the same wall, and he'll eventually fall into the acid surrounding the arena. At least that's what I think is going on. To be honest, I beat this boss without having a clue if I was doing the right thing or not, so if I'm wrong about this, I don't know how the hell you're supposed to beat him. We then enter the next set of levels, which appear to be set in some kind of city, I guess? The standout thing here is the terrible skybox, which looks like it was drawn by a child in Microsoft Paint. Seriously, this is the best start they could get to use as a skybox? It's horrible. The levels suddenly become more maze-like in these areas, and this is where my anger really peaked. The last thing I wanted to be doing was playing Bubsy 3D and getting lost in really long and complicated mazes with the horrible, repetitive music and sound design constantly playing in my head on a loop. Everything just becomes so overly complicated at this point in the game. Every level basically consists of you finding a switch to activate a fan or a moving platform, and then progress into a new maze where you have to do the same thing again until you find the exit. Also, why the hell does Bubsy keep saying that he's a room convention?
Look, I'm a room convention!
Some of the levels have these flying ships you can get in, but you don't actually drive them. Oh no, they drive themselves on a set path, and some of them take really long routes, and you just sat there like an idiot watching it happen. It's gotten to the point now where the game has forgotten it's a game and just plays itself. These parts do eventually make you jump from one ship to another, but then you just sat twiddling your thumbs again while you're riding another ship. It's boring. I don't even think I can accurately put across how bad these final levels of the game are. You're seeing it on the screen, but you don't know unless you've experienced it. I don't recommend anyone does experience it either, because it's like a drain on your very soul. It's like they read a book on the worst possible game design traits and put every single point into the game. There's nothing redeemable about it at all. Every single part of every single level is terrible, and you never know what the hell you're supposed to be doing because there's nothing explaining what's going on. If I was to make a list of the top 10 worst levels in video games, all 10 of them would be for Bubsy 3D. It's really that bad. Okay, we're finally through the worst of it and we're on the final level. Not much longer to go now and I'll be done. Let's do this. The final level of Bubsy 3D suddenly introduces a very weird puzzle solving section, unlike anything that's been seen in the game up until this point. First of all, you start in a maze where there's invincible statues that shoot projectiles at you. These things are absolutely everywhere and it's so annoying avoiding them. The issue is that Bubsy can't turn very well, so the odds are you're gonna die on this section a lot. If you happen to make it past here, there's a mini-boss. Again, this is weird because there hasn't been mini-bosses in the rest of the game, so why suddenly introduce this in the last level? You have to jump on platforms and avoid falling objects while making your way over to the boss and jumping on him 3 times. It's actually the best boss in the entire game because it's not too annoying and it's actually obvious as to what you need to do. I mean, it's not fun, but it's a damn lot better than the rest of the game. After this, you make your way through an obstacle course where moving walls block your way and teleport you back to the start if you touch them. And then you enter an area with 4 switches, and tiny invincible woolies chase you around as you try to touch these switches. This is probably the worst bit of the entire game, and I got genuinely mad here. I don't get mad at games often, but this pushed me over the edge. You have to work out a combination based on the colour of the switches to activate the path to the last boss, but the combination is nowhere to be seen, so you probably just have to work it out for yourself, right? Well, this wouldn't be too bad, but these tiny invincible woolies are way faster than Bubsy and can't be killed or even slowed down or anything. They just endlessly chase you and hunt you down until they hit you. I died here and got a game over multiple times, and do you know what getting a game over does? That's right, it sends you back to the beginning of the level. So multiple times I had to make my way through the maze at the start, beat the mini-boss and get through the obstacle course, and I was ready to either snap the disc or snap my own neck. That's when fate intervened and I discovered this coloured totem pole at the start of the level in the maze. Obviously this indicates the correct sequence for the coloured switches at the end of the level, but why in God's name is this clue in a maze at the start of the level when the switches are at the end? It makes no sense and this is absolute tosh. With my newfound knowledge I was able to hit the switches and get to the last boss, but then there's the trouble of working out how the hell this works too. The boss is actually two enemies who shoot you with projectiles and teleport around the arena area. You can't jump on them to hit them, so obviously you have to use atoms, but the atoms are in cubes which you can't go through. So to deactivate the cubes temporarily, you hit a switch in the middle of the stage and then have to run to the atom before the cube activates again. Then you shoot the atom at one of the bosses and do this again and again until they're dead. Easy, right? No. No, it's not easy. Nothing in this game is easy. You should know that by now. So the big problem here is that when you hit the switch in the middle of the stage, you then have to go to one of 4 atoms placed in each corner of the arena. Knowing that Bubsy basically can't turn around while moving, we have a problem. No matter what happens, when you run at an atom, you're going to be facing outwards, and you can't turn around with an atom because it will explode and hurt you after a short amount of time, and Bubsy turns really slowly. So what I figured out is that the best way of doing this is to go from the switch to an atom, but then as you get close to it, turn Bubsy towards the atom next to it and hit it from the side. Then you have just enough time to turn around fully with the atom and hit the boss. But it shouldn't be this complicated. It's obviously just a matter of the developers not properly designing the game based around Bubsy's moveset and control style, and it's a flaw that's fatal to the game as a whole and the biggest reason why this game is regarded as one of the worst ever made. I want to add here that I actually got a game over on this final boss too and had to do the whole level again for the millionth time. By this point I was so mad at the game and I was so close to just not finishing it and just giving up. And to be honest, I'm not sure saying that I've completed Bubsy 3D is enough of a reward to warrant what I went through. The final cutscene goes to another town meeting and shows that Bubsy was defeated by the final boss and captured yet again. But Bubsy escaped after they didn't take his rocket parts off of him, and he managed to escape the woolly homeworld using these parts. However, because I didn't collect all of the rocket parts, he doesn't make it back to Earth and is instead stranded somewhere between Saturn and Uranus. This leaves the Woolies able to invade Earth and take all of its wool. You see, the thing about this is, I don't care. There's no way I'm ever going to get all of the rocket parts to get the true ending, because I never want to go through this experience ever again. A while ago I did a review for a game called Hugo and claimed that it was worse than Bubsy 3D. However, after replaying Bubsy 3D, this quite clearly isn't the case. I even said that Hugo 2 was the worst game I had ever played, and yet again, this isn't the case either. I forgot just how bad Bubsy 3D is, and without a doubt, this is the worst game I've ever played. It's terrible and it's a failure on almost every single level. The only sort of redeeming feature is that this game was made in the very early days of 3D gaming, so it sort of has an excuse to be bad. I mean, to be fair, this was made by an independent studio, whereas games like Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario 64 had the backing of Sony Computer Entertainment, Universal, and Nintendo, so it makes sense that they would be a lot better. But you can only excuse it to a certain degree. Going back to it today, it's an abysmal game, and it's so bad that not only is it hard to put across just how bad it is, but it's even difficult to comprehend how bad it is. I could go on and on about all of the different smaller things that annoy me about Bubsy 3D. In almost every level there's a new mechanic added that's just plain bad, but to go into that much detail, the video would need to be over an hour long. I'm giving Bubsy 3D a 1 out of 10. There's nothing here that's positive to say. You could say I'm being harsh because of how old it is, but screw that. I reviewed games that are much older than this and they hold up 1,000,000 times better. You shouldn't even bother playing this for a laugh, it's not funny. It's entertaining for about 2 levels, but then it begins to hit you just how bad it is and it stops being entertaining almost immediately. The controls are awful and unresponsive. I literally can't think of a PS1 game that looks worse than this. The story is basic and doesn't do a good job of making the enemies into a threat. The sound design and voice acting is grating and annoying beyond belief. And the gameplay is repetitive, bland, and there's no sense of the levels having any thought put into the design at all. There's just nothing here to say about the game that's positive. Well, actually, I like the idea of the level title cards and the level ending cutscenes, and there are some mildly entertaining idle and death cutscenes. But these things aren't enough to elevate the game's status at all on their own. You need the other stuff to back it up. I suppose the one thing we can take away from this experience is that it's the best example of how not to make a game that you could ask for. So this is Christmas. And what have you done?
Oh, you wanna be
Another year over.
For starters, grab all the items you see.
A new
There's
one just
plenty
begun.
of them in each level, and if you get enough of them, you'll
And
be
so
in
this
for
is
some
Christmas.
surprises. Now, what would a platform
you
game be
have
without
fun.
platforms? I wonder if
The
there's
near
any
and
extra
the
lives
dear
up
one.
there. Trust me, there's no way
The
you
old
can make
and
it to
the
that extra
young.
life over there without gliding.
A very
Try
Merry
jumping and see for
Christmas.
yourself. But don't say I didn't
And a
warn you.
Happy New Year.
Woohoo! Now, if you lose a
Let's
Bubsy,
hope
you'll start
it's
over
a good
here
one.
instead of at the beginning of the level.
Without
Ain't life
any
grand? Yo! Woolies, my enemy!
Thanks so much for watching my Christmas special review. Let me know in the comments if you agree that Bubsy 3D is one of the worst, if not the worst, game ever made. It's definitely the worst one I've ever played that I can think of. Hopefully this got you all in the festive spirit. After all, there's nothing more Christmassy than Bubsy. Subscribe for more content coming soon, and until next time, bye!